Hey everybody, this is Mike with Free Roaming Photography, and in this video I'm talking to you about how to photograph the northern lights, as well as how to see them from Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park if you happen to be in the area. And a bit later I'm also going to answer the question, what's the difference between the northern lights and the southern lights? So stick around to check out the answer for that if you don't already know. So to really understand how to photograph them effectively, it helps to understand what exactly are the northern lights. So the northern lights, aka the aurora borealis, occur when solar flares erupt from sunspots on the sun. And in order to trigger the northern lights, it has to be Earth directed. So depending on the intensity, the solar flare will react with Earth's magnetic field, and it will typically be seen in Canada or Alaska, or depending on the intensity, much farther south in stronger storms. And a lot of times the northern lights can even range in color. And this is because of the different molecules that it's reacting with in the atmosphere. So you'll get some red if there's a lot of reaction with nitrogen, and often you'll see green from reactions with oxygen. Now, the stronger reaction, i.e. the solar flare, also called a coronal mass ejection, which spews out from the sun, the farther south they'll be seen. And so how do you know how strong they are? Well, just like the weather on Earth, we also have space weather. And a site I check frequently to check on aurora activity is spaceweatherlive.com. And you can sign up for alerts for when the auroras are visible, and likewise, there's also an app on your phone to make it a little more convenient. When you first pull up the site or the app, there's a lot of different data regarding the impacts of solar wind on our magnetosphere. And there's a few different things that I primarily look at. The first is something called the KP index. The KP index measures how strong Earth's magnetic field is being disturbed by solar wind. And this is measured on an arbitrary scale from 0 to 9. Most days you'll likely see it between 1 and 4, and the activity there will be in the green range. This means that the auroras will only be seen in the far north, such as Canada and Alaska. If the KP gets to 5 or above, there's a good chance of seeing them around Grand Teton and Yellowstone. But there's a couple of other factors that play into that. So you also want to check the solar wind data. This measures the speed at which the solar wind is hitting Earth's magnetic field. So if it starts getting above 500 or 600, this definitely helps to push the northern lights farther south. And then the third thing I check is the BZ index. This measures the solar wind's magnetic orientation. Now, for good auroral activity, you want a BZ index that's closer to -10 or lower. Basically, the farther down in the negatives, the better the chance of seeing it at a lower latitude, such as Grand Teton or Yellowstone. And what this means is that auroras are stretching farther south rather than north. Now, admittedly, I don't check everything every time. At first glance, I'm just going to look at the KP index. If it's 3 or less, I don't really hold much hope and I continue on with other things. If it's 4, the solar wind and the BZ have to be strong for it to be seen from this area. And even then, you'll really only see them on the northern horizon if you can see them with the naked eye at all. It might be too faint for human eyes at that point, but your camera would pick something up. Now, if it's a KP5, then I'll check the data and even do a test shot outside to see if the conditions are right. And those are kind of your more borderline values where it could go either way, the KP4 or 5. But once you get to KP6 or above, that's when I'll be out all night photographing the northern lights. If you get something as high as KP7, 8, or even 9, you could see them much farther south, like in southern states or even the southwest. Now, in terms of photographing the northern lights, you're going to need a decent night lens, and you need to be comfortable with manual mode and shooting at night. So if you're not familiar with manual mode, I do have a video that helps with that and sort of gives you a little crash course into diving into it and understanding what all the values mean. So be sure to watch that if that's something you want your help with, just to get started and understand how to shoot at night more effectively. And even if you do know how to do night photography, the rules for northern lights are just a little bit different. And the biggest difference is that you don't want a shutter speed to exceed about 6 seconds or so. This is because if you shoot any longer than about 6 seconds, you're going to blur those fantastic ribbons that really define the auroras. So naturally, because of that, you're going to want a lens with a really wide aperture, something like f2.8 or 1.8 or something in that range. That way, when you have to crank up the ISO to compensate for that shorter shutter speed, it's not too big of a problem with noise. And so in a nutshell, that's how you capture the auroras. For your foreground, with the extra bit of light in the sky, you can get creative with silhouettes, or you'll notice that the landscapes are lit up a bit more, which you can play with for those illuminated landscapes or subjects. And so we've been talking about the northern lights this whole time, but what are the southern lights? Really, there's nothing too complicated about it. Northern lights are in the northern hemisphere, southern lights are in the southern hemisphere. So if you're visiting a place like Australia or New Zealand, you're going to be referring to them as southern lights rather than northern lights. As such, everything in this video applies to southern lights as well, minus of course the locations that we were referring to. But that is how you photograph the northern lights in a nutshell. I hope you found this video inspiring and informational. If you did, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions down below or anything you want to add. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and happy trails.